Hi, Achim Schloeffel, InnerSpace Explorers. As you know, we run the ISE requalification in Munich at the moment, and I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to Juan, who represents InnerSpace Explorers in the Philippines at the moment, so generally the Asian market. And we just had a discussion about cave versus rec, because we realized the rec class is something that's not taken as often as the cave classes, and we started talking about why that's the case and why other agencies, for example, do not have rec classes and what's the differences and so on. And we figured out that's probably a good topic to be discussed in public. So you just came up with some experience things from your...
Yeah, well, it's a common thing when people come up for courses to actually start asking whether they should take the rec class or the cave class and so on and so forth, right? And some people, they don't even make that distinction, thinking that since it's an overhead environment, they feel like if they take one class, they can do with the other. Whereas in ISE, right, we specifically make a distinction between a rec class and a cave class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a total different environment, and I hear that often, like, I take the cave class because then I can also dive inside a rec, which may be partially true, but if at all, it's the opposite side. If I can dive the more hostile environment of a rec, I probably can dive a cave. I mean, I wouldn't say that to a student. I wouldn't emphasize this, but it's more true than the other way around, because the rec is actually a way more complicated environment regarding, I mean, open ocean, depth, currents, drifting, blue water sense, all of the things that the cave doesn't have and obviously doesn't have in the training.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely interesting to note that when you talk about rec and caves, you're talking about two very distinct environments that have their own situational intricacies that have to be appreciated so that you can dive them properly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, like when, it's very interesting because when I was talking to these locals in Coron, for example, the local dive masters there who have been diving these wrecks for more than 20 years, some of them have over 20,000 dives in those wrecks. And in fact, their training is quite interesting, because they do these wrecks without lines.
Yeah.
And part of their apprenticeship in touring these wrecks or bringing out groups of divers to do these wrecks is based on learning on the fly with a more senior dive master, right? Having said that, they go through the wreck and start memorizing each room, where it is, which pattern to follow, and so on and so forth. And because they're doing it so often, they start developing an understanding of what a wreck normally should look like and how to evaluate whether there's actual structural damage over time, which, as we know, happens to wrecks constantly, because wrecks are a ticking time bomb, right?
Yeah.
So basically, there's nothing we can do to stop it. Maybe we can slow it down, and part of this process of slowing down, for example, a wreck that's deteriorating at a really bad pace, is to actually spare the environment from how we dive it. That's one thing.
Yeah, very true. And as an interesting point was this, what I would call progressive penetration. There is wrecks where you, for example, the classical line work, like you would teach it in a cave, does not really work. And I had a particular case where I wanted to reach a certain room that I saw on the building plans, but I could not really get there in the first place, so I started to search for a way. And as the environment was so cramped that I felt an additional line would be an additional hazard, so you start to go in there, and actually that wreck was burned down pretty bad. Yeah. So you had all this black slush everywhere. Yeah. And the moment you exhaled, visibility went to zero. So the way in was kind of okay. The way out was always completely off. But that line, because there was so many things flying around, different cables and stuff that broke down from the ceiling, the line was not a real option. So you start thinking about how you can do that and how do you safely go in there. So you, as you just said, the memorization, you go in 5 meters, you start noting certain things. There's this pipe coming out, there's this, there's that. you turn around, you go back out.
Yes.
You do the same thing again. So I mean, obviously it takes you a lot of time, but you really learn your environment over a certain period of time. Most of us don't have the opportunity to do that. I mean, who can do 20,000 dives on a wreck if you're not basically living on it?
I know.
But it's just a good example of complete different things than in certain caves.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it builds a better appreciation of what these guys can understand.
Yeah.
I mean, again, in contrast, there's this friend of mine in Subic who's been diving there for so long already, right? And the way he describes a wreck to me, for example, if I were to ask him, how do I get into this area of the wreck? He'll tell me, okay, so you go down to the second level, and then you do maybe 5 mini frogs, take a big inhale, and he'll describe it that way, right? And then you go up, you helicopter a little bit, and then you go this way, and then you go this way, and then you go, and then you exhale, and then you're in, and then you go, right? And I mean, these are very, very interesting skill refinement techniques, right? That many of us do take for granted. Because typically when we say we dive, we get our buoyancy down pat, we are able to do skills and so on and so forth. But to actually apply that to the environment, that's where the training comes in. That's where good training agency will really teach you to appreciate the nuances of each area where you dive. So caves, wrecks, and so on and so forth have their own peculiarities. And each one deserves respect. Each one deserves some better appreciation of what's around you to actually understand what perils there are when you go through them.
Yeah. The other thing is when I teach wreck diving, for example, I also teach a lot about the wreck itself. So like how to learn what specific wreck it is, how to think about identification, how to look at certain shapes to learn from what period is it, what was it, especially thinking about newer wrecks. So if you have wrecks, like the last wreck course I was teaching was actually in Egypt, Chap Abu Nuwas, so a lot of people that watch this video probably know that area. There's 4 wrecks lined up that we know pretty well. So, but for somebody that's new to it, it's interesting to make them figure out over the dives, like, hey, just dive the wreck. I don't tell you anything about it. You figure it out yourself. What was it? What period was it of? What do you think caused the issue? And so on and so on.
Yeah.
Figure out if you find the cargo, the layout of the ship, where was the bridge, and so on, and learn basically about shipbuilding. So I'm teaching a lot of this in the class because I think, as you said, you want to appreciate the environment, you want to learn about it and not just swimming by.
Yeah.
And so I can absolutely not support this idea of, if you can dive a cave, you can dive a wreck. But that's a very, very spread out mentality and something that I hear so often. But there's so many skills that, in my opinion, make a good wreck diver that are missing in normal cave training. And especially, I mean, I said it before, the additional dangers, the possibility of getting cut, the constant change, tides, currents, sometimes cargo, marine life,
and stuff.
so many different things. I will see. I mean, we actually working on a bit of a reshaping of our classes, and I think the rec program, and actually also the rec experience. Actually, you could probably say a few words on the rec experience program because you wrote it.
Yeah, the rec experience program is actually a very interesting introduction to rec diving. No? And the reason there was a need for it was because typically what happens in our country, in the Philippines, is that there are a lot of rec tours that are operating. And rec tours generally take a group of divers through one hole in the wreck, exit the other, and that's it, right? And when you listen to the stories of the divers who've actually been in there without the proper training, and we talk about proper training in case something happens, right? They actually get themselves into situations that they don't even know are so dangerous, right? So they get into situations where they're left inside the wreck and they have to sort of get their bearings and figure out how to get out, and these are really scary situations, right? But one of the most interesting things that I've discovered is that there is a lack of appreciation, like you were saying, for the totality of the wreck.
Yeah.
Typically, people will dive into a hole and then come out another hole, just going through a passage, not really understanding the context. And part of I think a big part of wreck diving is that context, understanding what the ship was there for.
And the history of it. I mean,
Yeah, and the
most of them are
history.
graves, on the other hand, which is a different
Yeah.
story than a cave.
Yeah, so I mean, going back again to the wreck experience class, what we actually try to give people there who want to kind of figure out, is this kind of diving what I want to do, right? We kind of give them a pathway to try to start understanding the perils that are there, because if they understand the dangers that are there, then they can understand how to prevent themselves from getting into those problems, and they become much safer, more careful, and more aware of the wreck environment itself. So that's what that class is all about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea, and really hope you appreciate that. If so, please give us a thumbs up. Also, check out Facebook. We'll post a lot of new things over the next couple of weeks. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.